Concertino da Camera by Jacques Ibert with Sigurd Rascher playing alto saxophone. applause there that I just cut off the tape. That's the work Concertino da Camera. It's a tape from the Library of Congress with our guest this morning, Sigurd Rascher, playing the work written for him by Jacques Ibert. The Krasner Ensemble, conducted by Louis Krasner, another venerable gentleman of music. We'll be talking with Sigurd Rascher about this and other pieces of music and about his career as a concert saxophonist. After we pause a minute for station identification, it is now just 35 seconds after 11 o'clock. Morning Pro Musica coming to you this morning as it does every day from 7 till noon, thanks to generous contributions from listeners. Sigurd Rascher is here with us, finally. Many years we have corresponded and talked on the phone, and now we finally meet for the first time.
Correct.
In person. And first of all, happy birthday.
Thank you.
I sort of figured, even without having met you, that you would be, I think the term they usually use is spry, but I would think energetic would be even better. A kind of bundle of energy.
Sometimes it comes in handy.
Yeah, coiled spring, just ready to go whenever the occasion demands.
You know, it's many years since I was in Boston.
Uh-huh.
And I asked, how do I get to Western Avenue? Oh, you take the T to Central.
Uh-huh.
Fine, that's what I did. All kinds of construction and so, and there was a very polite policeman. I asked him, could you please direct me to Western? Oh, yeah, right. You see that big white house? That's Western.
Uh-huh.
125, well, probably 3 short blocks.
It's over a mile.
I went there, and 125 is a somewhat oldish private house. So I said, it can't be Western. There must be different Western avenues. And after looking back and forth, I asked a young man, and he said, that's the other Western Avenue. That's way away from here, all the way down to the river, across the river, past the football field.
Yeah.
That's where, you better take a taxi. Oh, you try to find a taxi there. Forget it. So it came very handy that I don't mind walking a mile or two.
Well, from there, if you were at Central Square, that's well over a mile.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You must be close to 2 miles.
Yeah.
But it didn't bother me. It's a nice walk, and it didn't rain, so fine and good. So you see, it comes in handy.
Right. Well, Spaziergehen. Thank you for being here, for all of the help that you've given over the years.
Oh, my pleasure.
It has been
Indeed.
It has been a joy to correspond with you and talk with you in the past, and now I'm delighted to have you. I want to talk about the piece that we just heard, which is the Ibert
Concertino, yeah.
He wrote that at your suggestion, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I mean, he wouldn't have written a piece with solo saxophone otherwise.
No, although he lived in Paris, which at that time still was the city where there was more saxophone playing than in any other city.
Mm-hmm.
But he never had thought of writing anything for saxophone solo. And indeed, he was already there, the second notable composer in that position, whom I motivated to write something. The first was Glazunov, also in Paris, a year earlier. And I was introduced to Ibert by a beautiful singer, a real artist, Maria Freund, and she knew him, and she had heard me at a music festival in Strasbourg and said, well, you want to meet a few composers in Paris. I'd be glad to introduce you. So, of course, I was delighted. I was a youngster. And she had obviously opened the door, and we came to Ibert in the afternoon, a cup of coffee, and so you play saxophone? Well, what are you doing? No, I started playing, and then, of course, he started asking questions. And
he had never written for saxophone before,
no,
needless to say.
No.
In fact, he didn't even have all that much acquaintance with the instrument.
It seemed so, yes. So, and when he heard the range that the saxophone has, 4 octaves, he was quite amazed.
Well, he certainly made use of it, because in that last movement he goes right up to the top.
A flat.
Yeah.
There's one more. There's A natural and B flat, and at times B natural and C. But this is a bit precarious. But he went to A flat, so he did not write without knowledge, as has been asserted at that time. There were many who said he didn't know what the saxophone can do. How could he demand that? On the contrary, he knew it very well. And together with the saxophone concerto by Glazunov, those two are easily the most famous pieces of the literature.
Both of which were written for you at your request.
Yes.
But also there have been pieces written by Mio. And
that was also composed for me.
Yeah.
The Scaramouche.
Right, yeah.
But it was then that this war started. And in Europe, the rumor went about, Rascher also gone with the war. So, and some people already had started writing obituary. So, Mio was not one to throw a good piece away, so he arranged it for 2 piani. And in that form, it was played very often, especially here in this country.
We just had a performance of it live on Musica a couple of weeks ago, the Scaramouche, in the 2-piano version.
And then, of course, I met him then out in Aspen, and he looked at me as though I had risen from the grave. He didn't believe it. And then, of course, then he came out with the version for saxophone that I knew, because I had played it with him in his studio at the Boulevard de Clichy in Paris before the war started. But it wasn't ready yet. And then, of course, it came out in its original version for saxophone, but he couldn't very well dedicate it to me after all that. So, the Mio is also for me.
Now, getting back to the Ibert, there is also in that last movement, in addition to going up into the stratosphere, just before that, what sounds like key slaps.
Well, it's a slight percussive effect, which you can make on both single reed instruments, on the clarinet just as well. And
but it's not a key slap.
No, it has nothing to do with the mechanism of the instrument. Through what you might call adhesion, you pull the reed away from the mouthpiece, and when through its own elasticity it jumps back, that is what you hear. And if you use it very sparingly, just a little bit, it's nice. But it's a question: do you do it coarsely or with a certain delicatezza?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Bartok pizzicato of the saxophone.
So, pizzicato is a good name for it. Why not?
Let's listen to that last movement again, and we'll, especially for those points where there's that slapping sound of the tongue.
Yes, it's the
reed.
tongue.
And the very high. Well, actually, he runs just about the full range of the instrument, almost.
Yes, there are just two more half tones.
And he's
Henry Brandt has used the full
down.
4 octaves. Right down to the low. Sure.
Okay. Here's the last movement of the Concertino da Camera, work written for our guest Sigurd Rascher by Jacques Ibert. Again, it's with Louis Krasner and his ensemble. There's that last movement again of the Concertino da Camera by Jacques Ibert, a work written for and played by our guest this morning on Morning Pro Musica, Sigurd Rascher, who is celebrating today his 80th birthday. That's a tape-recorded performance from the Library of Congress with the Louis Krasner Ensemble, Louis Krasner directing. Thank you, Sigurd Rascher, who, he studied in Stuttgart, yes? First at the Musikhochschule.
That is correct. I wanted to be a musician, and obviously, it seems so, looking back, I hadn't really decided what. I started studying piano, and it didn't really engage me completely.
Uh-huh.
But then I was very much impressed by a gentleman who was then celebrated as the best artist on the clarinet in Germany, Philipp Dreisbach.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to learn from him. And I started and made good progress, so it seems. After 2 years, I played the Mozart concerto.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems as though he was somewhat satisfied with my progress, because when it was necessary for me to stand on my own feet. And of course, I was still a beginner on the clarinet. There wasn't a chance to do anything with that.
Mm-hmm.
Someone told me, "Why, Sigurd, why don't you take a saxophone? You can get a job tomorrow." And I was naive enough to accept that. I even had to ask, "What do you mean?" I was hardly aware of the existence of a saxophone, let alone know what it is. And I was told the fingerings have some similarity, and it also has a mouthpiece, so you'll make it very quickly. And that was correct. I did have what you call a one-night job very quickly, and that was pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized I should be able to play better in order to land better jobs. So I started practicing and looked around for a teacher. I never found a teacher. Not then and not years later.
Mm-hmm. But you became a very famous teacher yourself at the Royal Danish...
Well, yes, but
conservatory.
my expectations were obviously higher than could be satisfied at that time.
Uh-huh.
So I was out playing in all kinds of situations for several years. There was completely commercial playing for dance, in hotels, even in nightclubs.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, it seemed to me the saxophone can do more. After all, I had grown up as a youngster with Bach, Schubert, Handel, with the classics on piano.
Mm-hmm.
And I had progressed to the Mozart concerto. And to play foxtrots was just not enough for me. So I started practicing very intensely. And there came the time, well, that's what I did. I did then, when I came to Berlin, the father of a friend of mine, who was at that time the most famous German oratorio singer. He sang the Evangelist in the Bach oratorio.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Sigurd, you should play Bach." I thought that was sacrilegious. Bach on the saxophone. Yes, he said, and he gave me the music. So that's how that began. And then, of course, I simply asked composers, would you have 5 minutes to listen to me? Right then in Berlin. But now let's go and hear one piece by Bach. Now, in the Ibert, we heard the saxophone going up quite considerably in the upper register. In that Bach, you can hear a group of saxophones, and one of them is 2 octaves below the alto. Not 1 octave, as is the baritone, and 1.5, as is the basso, but fully 2 octaves.
Contrabasso.
The contrabasso. It is an instrument that is almost 7 feet high. So, let us hear that. It's the chorale Wachet auf.
The chorale Wachet auf.
Now, in this, you really could hear the very low sounds of the saxophones and how beautifully that integrates. And it's a low wind instrument that is more expressive than any of the other very low woodwind instruments.
Now, all of the saxophones are transposing instruments, yes?
Most. There is a C saxophone, and that was the very popular C melody in the 20s here in this country. Because there are 2 families. One is in E flat and B flat transposing, and that was the one that Adolf Sachs had thought of as for bands, and the other in C and F, and those he had intended for orchestras. And I wouldn't know any preferences. This is the one likes this, the other that, but I wouldn't be able to say the one is better than the other. That's simply the one likes this or that. And they both exist. Today, the CF family is, shall we say, almost extinct. I do have members of both, of course, And when you hear them, each one has a somewhat different character. Yes, we know that. The tenor has a different character than the alto, and that's good and fine. But because the saxophone has such a very complete overtone overtone spectrum, you might say, they are all there. That is why they integrate so beautifully. In a acoustic laboratory at the University of Michigan, when I taught there, we checked on that and we tested the various saxophones. And as a family, it is correct to say that there is next to no musical instrument that has the overtones to such a well-balanced degree throughout the range. And that is intentional. Sax was a very accomplished acoustician and instrument maker, and he combined that by being also a first-rate musician. He was first clarinet in the orchestra in Brussels before he was 20. So he was not only a good instrument maker, he was also an accomplished musician and an acoustician who formulated laws that today are as correct as they were when he pronounced them.
In the middle of the 19th century.
Yes. So the original construction of the saxophone dates to 1841. And in 1842, he, he demonstrated the instrument to a number of famous musicians in Paris. And they were delighted. They were delighted with what they heard, and all of them spoke of the beautiful tone quality. Every one of them. And that is very much within keeping with Sachs's intentions, because he wanted to give us voice, and in the patent letter, which is the oldest document in which he really wrote about the saxophone, he referred to it as la voix, the voice, not the instrument. So the expression, the expressive possibilities, that's what interested him.
Now, obviously, jazz wasn't around at that time.
Not really. That took another quite a few years.
Saxophones.
In the teens. That's when that started.
Saxophones, which are now so closely associated with jazz, had to be used for something else.
Yes. Oh, yes. Now, the first time the saxophone was heard in public was on the 3rd of February 1844. And Berlioz, who was much impressed by the instrument, he arranged a hymn that he had composed earlier, a 6-voice hymn, for 6 of the instruments that Sachs made, either original as the saxophone or improved as, for instance, the bass clarinet. Sachs made the first usable bass clarinet also. So there were these 6 instruments. And I have found the reviews from the newspapers in Paris, and one of the critics was obviously greatly impressed by the saxophone, and it was the basso saxophone. Sachs knew enough about instrument making that he grasped that when you have to make experiments, they're easier made on a big instrument than on a small instrument, because when you change a 1/4 of an inch in an object of metal, that's much easier to be done on a big instrument than on a small one, and a 1/4 of an inch on the basso will mean proportionately much, much less than would be on the alto or soprano. So he knew his business, and it was a basso that was played at that time. And in the same year, on the 1st of December, the saxophone was heard for the first time in an orchestra. And that was by the composer George Kastner. He was from Strasbourg but lived in Paris. And it was on a biblical theme, the last king of Judah. And the saxophone, the basso, has quite a part in that. Then came other works, but all of them treated the saxophone with great respect. The first time a quartet was used was by Halevi in Le Juif Errant, and it is in the very last scene. The score has 600 pages, and I had somewheres heard that there might be a saxophone in one of Halevi's works. So I leafed through every page, because it isn't as today that the total instrumentation is given on the first page. No, it was just where it's used. And there is a whole quartet of saxophones, and The Errant Jew is the story of it. Someone who goes through life, makes mistakes and so on, and in the next to last scene, they are down in hell. And there is a large group of sax horns, heavy brasses. But he doesn't stay there. And the friends of the main character, they, what could you say, they implore the Lord, well, he has made mistakes, but please, please. So, that's in higher regions. It is a quartet of saxophones that accompany the singer. So the saxophone was in very high esteem. The oldest use of saxophone in orchestra that is still now played is the Arlésienne. That was in 1872. It was premiered in Le Châtelet. The saxophone portrays a very pleasant character. It's incidental music, you know, Arlésienne 1 and 2, the suites. The saxophone plays plenty in there. And then other composers used it, but always with great respect.
Did Wagner use the saxophone?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That is a funny one. Now, Wagner performed the Tannhäuser in Paris. And you know, there comes a scene with plenty of music behind the scene, and Wagner had wanted 12 French horns behind the scene.
Right.
Now, who was director of the stage music at that time? Adolf Sachs.
Yeah.
And he couldn't find, because there were 8 French horns in the pit, he couldn't find another 12 up to snuff. So what did he? He put a few saxophones in. And they blend to perfection, because French horn is the only wind instrument that has the almost identical overtone spectrum with the saxophone.
Yeah.
So again, Sachs knew what he was doing. And Wagner, who conducted, no, he did not conduct, pardon me, but he came backstage and he profusely thanked Sachs for having done that so beautifully. Afterwards, he found out that there were saxophones in it. And instead of saying, well, that really did fit well together, although I didn't know it, he was really angry. And later then, I could give you all the dates and so on. Later he composed the Tristan. And there is the scene at the castle, and you hear the shepherd. Now you remember the tune the shepherd plays. Ta-ta, pardon me. Ta-ta-di-di, ta-ta-da-di, ta-ta-da-da-di. That's all saxophone. But then he remembered the event in Paris and tore it out. Now, how do I know that?
Put in English horn.
Yes, it isn't written down. In New York lived Walter Damrosch. When I lived in New York, I was like the son in the house. And when Damrosch had his 50th wedding anniversary, his son-in-law, Mannes, I think his name, was it David Mannes? Piano player. And the flute player, Georges Barrère. We were good friends, and we decided to play the love duet from Tristan for the married time after the wedding dinner. So it came to me to play on the saxophone Isolde. Just because you would expect that the flute plays Isolde, no. Barrère played Tristan, and I played Isolde with long, big, yellow wool braids. So that was great hilarity. And Damrosch said to me, "Well, do you know, that makes me think, did you know that the shepherd's tune is really saxophone?" I said, "Impossible." "Oh, no," he said, "my father was a good friend of sax." And when you begin looking up the biographies, that is true. Damrosch's father, who was Wagner director for a long time in the Metropolitan, he knew Wagner very well, was only a few years his junior. And he said, Walter Damrosch said, "Sure, I know it from my father. He told me so and so and so." So there you have Wagner and the saxophone. Had he controlled his tempo, there would be saxophone in Tristan.
Yeah. Well, had Mozart or Brahms run into saxophone players instead of clarinet players in their final years?
Well, Mozart couldn't very easily have
it wasn't
had
invented
that,
at that
but
time.
Brahms certainly.
Yeah. But they both.
No one played for.
They both
for
opted
Brahms.
for clarinet players.
Think of Tchaikovsky. Well, there were many great composers, but they just weren't convinced. There was no saxophone player convincing them.
Right. Well, you certainly have taken up the cudgel for the saxophone with a great many composers since then, and in addition to which, you played with 250 major orchestras, all of the major orchestras throughout the world as a saxophone soloist. Gave the United States premiere performance of the saxophone with the Boston Symphony, and then with the New York Philharmonic. And,
sure. In fact, with the Boston
first two.
Symphony, I played a Boston piece, if you might say so. You know, Madame Elise Hall, at the turn of the century and end of last, she played saxophone for health reasons. Her husband was doctor, and she had some trouble with the lungs, so he said, "Why don't you play saxophone?" Okay, that's what she did, but she didn't have much to play, so she journeyed to Paris and commissioned composers, and one of them was Debussy. And he was a little careless and accepted the money and cashed the check. So then he was obligated, and he composed this, for all I know, in 1904. sealed it with the inscription, "This is not to be opened before my death." It was opened after his death and then published in 1919 by Durand in Paris. And it was performed here in Boston with the Boston Symphony, but no one could play it on saxophone. So it was performed on English horn. All this I didn't know.
Which piece was this?
The Debussy Rhapsody for orchestra and saxophone.
Uh-huh.
That's what he composed.
So when that was first played, it was played with English horn?
Here in Boston, yes. And I even knew the man who had played it. A beautiful musician, fine musician, and I didn't know when I played that for Koussevitzky. I wanted to have the chance to play for him, and it was so, he took a shower after the rehearsal, but I played for him, and he came out there, "What is this?" So I said, "It's Ibert Concertino." No, he hasn't composed anything, so I simply held the score under his nose. So he said, "Play." So I played more. "You played the Debussy?" "Sure, I've just performed it in Australia." "Leave your address with the manager." That was the whole audience. Finished. When I played it then, I didn't know that I was the first to play it on saxophone with the Boston Symphony. But that's what it was.
We should move on to this other tape, but we're not going to have time to get it in. What is the other tape that you brought in?
That is Larsen.
Oh.
The concerto by Larsen, who also has his birthday on this day.
Yes.
So let's play at least, we can take the first two movements.
Lars Erik Larsen is the composer, conductor, professor of music who died in Sweden last year, in December of 1986. He was 78 years old at the time.
Yes.
And this is a concerto that he wrote, again, for you.
Yes.
Okay.
In 1934.
I wish we had enough time to let the tape go. And can you leave that tape with me for a while?
Yeah?
Yeah. Maybe I could play the whole thing through tomorrow morning. I'm doing some
Fine.
just new additions to the library tomorrow, so play it all the way through. I'd like to do that. That's just the first movement of the famous concerto by Lars Erik Larsson, very much respected Swedish composer whose works throughout his life and still are very much played in Sweden, very highly respected. His works are as popular as the one that everybody knows, the Alfén.
Oh, yeah. More so.
Rhapsody, yeah.
Yeah.
And that concerto, of course, one of his best-known works because it made such great use of the saxophone as a serious concert instrument.
And I have played it all the way around the world, even Tasmania.
Uh-huh. We have a little surprise for you. You ready?
Okay. Happy birthday to you.
My
Happy
goodness.
birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Sigurd. Happy birthday to you.
Well, what next? My goodness, a cake with a candle and 3 charming ladies and
Yeah. Rondella Chiesa
more.
singing with us.
My
and,
word, what next?
You have to
But
make
that-
a wish and blow it out.
A wish?
Oh, you must
but
make a
I
wish,
don't
John.
have to say the wish.
No.
I can
No.
make it quietly.
Yes.
you have to keep it secret, otherwise it won't come true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I have made it already.
Good.
Yes. Now blowing,
Yeah.
sitting here.
Yeah.
Oh.
Terrific.
Well, my lungs are fairly good yet. I have 2 years ago on the big contrabasso, which is almost 7 feet tall, with no difficulty, I have outblown a young fellow who is a head taller than I am and only 22 years old. So, no smoke and play saxophone. You
80.
have made it.
You have good lungs,
That's at least I can guarantee for the first 80.
but she's on vacation.
Now you see, you wield a big knife there. And we know it is for cutting a cake.
Right.
Depends on what we decide to do. There are other people who use the knife for very, very sad purposes. The knife is the same, but we are not. That is the gist of what we do in this life. What we determine to do with what has been handed to us. And when that becomes clear to us, life makes sense. Look at the saxophone. You can play with sublime expression. You can also portray vulgarity as with no other instrument, because it is decidedly and intentionally so flexible. It is the instrument on which the player determines in freedom what to do. From that point of view, could say it is the most modern of them all. And that's, sure, that's what I have tried to do. Show that it can be a very noble instrument.
That's almost impossible. There's 35 to 40 seconds at least of that
Last
page.
Yes.
And
No
five.
reading.
That's all one breath. There's
Right.
no splicing, nothing,
No,
and that's
no,
incredible.
I vouch
That's-
for that.
Well, that explains why you. Let's all stay 3 feet from the cake and blow it out with one quick blow from that distance. Blow it. I guess the saxophone that must be the ideal instrument for developing lung power.
Oh, it is good. And you know, who has been the most ardent supporter of saxophone? Miss Rascher.
Ah,
But what she has done for saxophone players, she has sacrificed a career as a painter.
well, I hope to get a chance to meet Mrs.
As a
Rascher
very
this
good
summer.
painter.
Yeah, when I come to visit you this summer.
Ah, that sounds good.
Good. The piece we just heard, by the way, is called The Bee, and it's written by Franz Schubert.
But he was a fiddle player in Dresden.
Yeah, different Schubert.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
Not the Franz Peter Schubert.
No, that's correct.
Yeah. And there was no circular breathing involved in
Oh,
that.
no.
Yeah. Schubert can circular breathe playing.
Oh, of course it can be
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
But it
those
doesn't give you the same.
We have not enough time to go on, unfortunately. But we could listen to a little bit more of that. We say goodbye. Sigurd, thank you
Huh?
to you.
Luckily, it is not all that far to Boston.
Then you must come back, because we have much more about which to talk. Sigurd Rascher, our guest, celebrating today his 80th birthday. Morning Pro Musica made possible in part by a grant from Talbot's and by a grant from Bay Banks, and by your contributions to stations of the Public Radio Network.